When scientists reconstructed the face of a girl from Greece 9,000 years ago, the result shocked them. She was found inside Theopetra Cave, one of the most important archaeological sites in Greece, a natural limestone shelter that humans occupied continuously for over 130,000 years. Her skull was excavated in 1993. Radiocarbon dating placed her at approximately 7,000 BCE, the end of the Mesolithic period. She was between 15 and 18 years old when she died. Her bones showed signs of anemia, possible scurvy, and joint problems that may have limited her mobility. Archaeologists named her Abgi, the Greek word for dawn, because she lived at what they considered the dawn of civilization in Greece. In 2018, a team rebuilt her face, and the result looked nothing like modern Greeks. The reconstruction team included an endocrinologist, an orthopedist, a neurologist, a pathologist, and a radiologist from the University of Athens, alongside Swedish archaeologist and sculptor Oscar Nilsson. Nilsson started with the CT scan skull replica. Pegs were glued to the surface at specific anatomical points, indicating the thickness of flesh at each location, calibrated to her age and sex. The face that emerged had prominent cheekbones, a heavy brow ridge, a protruding lower jaw, and features that Nilsson described as very unique and not especially female by modern standards. Her jaw protruded forward in a way rarely seen in modern European populations. Researchers believe constant chewing of animal hides to soften them into leather caused this extreme mandibular development. Nilsson, who has reconstructed dozens of ancient faces, observed a broader pattern. Stone Age features appear to have disappeared or smoothed out over time. Modern humans in general look less masculine in facial structure than their prehistoric ancestors. But the skull only tells half the story. The DNA tells the rest. Ancient DNA extracted from Mesolithic individuals at Theopetra Cave, designated Theo1 and Theo5, was analyzed in a landmark 2016 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The Mesolithic Greeks were genetically distinct from modern Greeks. They belonged to a pre-farming hunter-gatherer population that would soon be largely replaced by incoming Neolithic farmers from Anatolia. The mitochondrial haplogroups of the Theopetra Mesolithic individuals fell within lineages later found in Neolithic farming populations across Europe, suggesting some genetic continuity between the two periods in the Aegean. But the overall genetic profile of Mesolithic Greece was fundamentally different from what would come next. These were hunter-gatherers, genetically adapted to a world without farming, without livestock, and without the massive population expansions that agriculture would bring. The DNA also revealed clues about appearance. The Neolithic Aegean farmers who arrived after the Mesolithic period carried derived variants of two key pigmentation genes, SLC24, a 5 and SLC45, a 2, associated with lighter skin. A 2025 study from the University of Ferrara analyzed 348 ancient genomes across Eurasia and found that dark skin persisted in many European populations well into the Bronze and Iron Ages. The shift toward lighter pigmentation was far slower and less linear than previously assumed. Avgi likely had darker skin than the average modern Greek, and her face was built for a harder world. The Theopetra Cave sits just 4 kilometers from Meteora in central Greece. When Avgi was alive, the Thessaly Plain was not the farmland it is today. It was a hunting ground covered in oak forest and scrubland. The cave faces north, which would have provided shade during the hot Greek summers and trapped warmth from fires during winter. Its position offered a commanding view of the surrounding terrain. Excavations led by archaeologist Nina Kyparisi, Apostolica, beginning in 1987, revealed the longest continuous archaeological sequence in Greece, spanning from the Middle Paleolithic through the Neolithic. The cave yielded stone tools, fireplace ashes, animal bones, and human footprints. The footprints, pressed into the soft cave floor tens of thousands of years ago, are believed to be among the oldest evidence of human presence in a constructed shelter. Avgi lived at the end of this immense timeline. During the final centuries before farming arrived in Greece, and transformed everything. She was among the last hunter-gatherers in a region about to become the gateway for farming across Europe. Within a few centuries of Abgiai's death, farmers from Anatolia crossed the Aegean and established the first agricultural communities in Greece, bringing a completely different way of life and a different genetic profile. The Neolithic Aegean farmers were genetically distinct from the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers they encountered. They carried ancestry rooted in southwestern Anatolia and brought with them wheat, barley, sheep, goats, and cattle. The genetic data shows that the transition from Mesolithic to Neolithic in the Aegean involved actual population movement, not just the adoption of farming techniques by existing hunter-gatherers. However, the Mesolithic Greeks were not entirely replaced. Some mixing occurred. The early Neolithic farmers in the Aegean carried a small but detectable component of local Mesolithic ancestry. The process continued over millennia. By the Bronze Age, the populations of mainland Greece had absorbed additional ancestry from the Caucasus and Iran, and later still from the Eurasian steppe. Modern Greeks are the product of all these layers. Abgiai represents only the oldest and most deeply buried one. A 2017 study by Lazaridis and colleagues in Nature showed that the Bronze Age Mycenaeans, often considered the ancestors of classical Greeks, derived roughly 3/4 of their ancestry from Neolithic Aegean farmers, and the rest from eastern and northern sources. The Mycenaeans built the civilization that Homer would later immortalize, but their DNA shows they were already a mixture of populations from multiple origins. Modern Greeks resemble the Mycenaeans closely, but with some additional dilution of the early Neolithic ancestry and contributions from later migrations during the Hellenistic and Roman periods. The Bronze Age frescoes of Crete and mainland Greece depicted people with dark hair and dark eyes, appearances that the Herasplex DNA phenotyping tool confirmed matched the genomic predictions for those populations. But Abgiai lived 4,000 years before the Mycenaeans. Her world was genetically, culturally, and physically different from everything that came after. When the reconstruction was unveiled at the Acropolis Museum in Athens in January 2018, the audience in the amphitheater was stunned. The face looking back at them bore almost no resemblance to the classical Greek ideal. No delicate features, no straight nose, no fine brow line. She looked like what she was, a survivor. Her protruding jaw and heavy brow are mechanical adaptations to a life of constant physical stress. Chewing raw and dried foods, processing animal hides with her teeth, and enduring chronic nutritional deficiency, all left their marks on her skeleton. The same team had previously reconstructed the face of Myrtis, an 11-year-old Athenian girl who died during the plague of Athens in 430 BCE. The contrast between the two faces spans 7,000 years. The visual contrast between the two faces illustrates 7,000 years of biological change more powerfully than any genetic chart. Myrtis, who lived in classical Athens during the age of Pericles, has facial features indistinguishable from modern children. Abgiai does not. The difference is not just cultural, it is biological. Nilsson has reconstructed faces from every major period of European prehistory. He describes a clear trend. Over the past 10,000 years, human facial features have become progressively less robust, less angular, and less sexually dimorphic. We are literally getting softer. And the DNA explains why. The transition to farming fundamentally changed the selection pressures on human bodies. Softer cooked foods replaced tough, raw meat and plant fibers. Jaw muscles were used less intensively. Over hundreds of generations, the jaw shrank, the brow ridge reduced, the entire face became more gracile. Farming did not just change what humans ate. It changed what humans looked like. But diet was not the only factor. The influx of Neolithic farmers from Anatolia brought different genetics into the Aegean population, including variants associated with facial proportions. The genetic architecture of the modern Greek face is a composite Mesolithic robustness, diluted by Anatolian farmer genes, further modified by steppe ancestry, and shaped by 10,000 years of changing diet and environment. The Neolithic transformation of the Aegean was not just about farming. It involved new trade networks, particularly for obsidian from the Cycladic Islands that connected communities across the sea. The appearance of pottery, polished stone tools, and permanent architecture in the archaeological record marks the moment when Avgiai's world ended and a new one began. The Neolithic farmers who replaced Avgiai's people brought not just different genes, but an entirely different material culture. Their pottery styles connect them directly to communities across the Aegean in western Anatolia. The technological gap between the two cultures was enormous. Avgiai's people used chipped stone tools and lived in caves. The farmers built permanent mud brick villages and stored surplus grain in ceramic vessels. Sesklo, one of the oldest Neolithic settlements in Europe, sits just 50 kilometers from Theopetra Cave. Within a few hundred years of Avgiai's death, farmers at Sesklo had built one of the earliest organized villages on the continent. The genetic transition happened gradually in the Aegean, unlike in some parts of Europe, where Mesolithic populations were almost entirely replaced. In Greece, some mixing occurred, leaving a faint but detectable trace of Avgiai's people in the farmer gene pool. The Meteora pillars that tower over Theopetra Cave today are topped with medieval monasteries. But the cave at their base holds evidence of human life older than any civilization those monks could have imagined. The 2025 pigmentation study from Ferrara provided the broadest evidence yet for how European appearance evolved over 45,000 years. Using a probabilistic genotype likelihood method on low-coverage ancient DNA, the researchers inferred skin, eye, and hair color across nearly 350 ancient individuals. The findings showed that dark skin was nearly universal among Paleolithic Europeans and remained common well into the Bronze and Iron Ages. The Mesolithic period showed a localized increase in lighter eye color, but not in skin pigmentation. Light skin in Europe is far more recent than most people assume, and it arrived unevenly across the continent. In the Aegean specifically, the Neolithic farmer migration introduced lighter skin variants, but the overall appearance of the population remained darker than what we associate with modern Greeks for several thousand years after farming arrived. The researchers emphasized that the process was anything but linear. Gene flow from different source populations sometimes increased dark pigmentation frequencies, even as selection favored lighter variants at higher latitudes. Greece, sitting at the crossroads of Europe, Anatolia, and the Near East, absorbed genetic influences from every direction over millennia, creating the diverse range of appearances visible in the modern Greek population. Modern Greeks display significant diversity in appearance, from very fair to quite dark, reflecting the multiple ancestry streams that have converged in the region over the past 10,000 years. Greek genetic researchers are now building the most detailed ancient DNA timeline of any Mediterranean country, with samples spanning from the Mesolithic through the Classical period and into the Byzantine era. Every new excavation adds potential samples. The teeth and bones of thousands of ancient Greeks sit in museum collections across the country, waiting for genomic analysis. The goal is a complete diachronic genetic portrait of Greece, tracking how the population changed at every major historical transition from Avgiai's time to the present day. The National Archaeological Museum holds skeletal collections from every major period of Greek history. Combined with modern sequencing technology, these collections represent an unmatched resource for understanding how migration and admixture shaped the people of the Aegean. Each tooth potentially holds the complete genetic profile of a person who lived in Greece thousands of years ago, including the pigmentation genes that determined exactly what they looked like. Modern Greeks are genetically closest to the Mycenaeans, but carry traces of every population that ever settled in the region, from Mesolithic hunter-gatherers to medieval Slavic and Frankish arrivals. A 2022 study in Nature Ecology and Evolution, analyzing 102 ancient genomes from Crete, the Greek mainland, and the Aegean Islands confirmed that genetic turnover in the region happened in distinct waves. The early Neolithic period brought the dominant Anatolian farmer ancestry. The early Bronze Age brought Eastern ancestry from populations related to those in the Caucasus and Iran. The late Bronze Age brought Central and Eastern European steppe ancestry. Each wave changed the face of Greece. And Avcii's face belongs to the oldest layer of all. She represents a population that was largely absorbed and overwritten by subsequent migrations. The Mesolithic hunter-gatherer contribution to modern Greek DNA is small, probably less than 10%. The Thopatra excavations continued for decades under Kyparissi Apostolika's direction. The cave has yielded evidence spanning from the Middle Paleolithic through the Neolithic, one of the longest continuous habitation records in Europe. A partial stone wall at the cave entrance, dated to approximately 23,000 years ago, during the last ice age, may be the oldest known man-made structure on Earth, built to block cold winds from entering the shelter. Each thin black line in the sediment represents a single fire lit by someone who sheltered in this cave. Thousands of fires over thousands of generations. For over 100,000 years, people lived in that cave. Avcii was one of the last. The skulls themselves tell the story. Mesolithic skulls from Greece show heavier muscle attachment sites and thicker cortical bone than their Neolithic successors. Digital morphometric analysis can now quantify exactly how much facial shape changed between the Mesolithic and later periods, measuring what Nilsson described as features smoothing out. Physical appearance changed more in the first 2,000 years after farming arrived than in the preceding 8,000 years of the Mesolithic. The Thessaly plain below is now one of the most productive farming regions in Greece. The landscape Avcii knew as wild forest has been cultivated continuously for 9,000 years. Visitors come for the geology and nearby Meteora monasteries. Few realize they stand where the genetic history of Greece began. 9,000 years, 3 population turnovers, and a face that reminds us the first people to call this land home looked nothing like those who live here. Now, within a few centuries of her death, farmers from across the Aegean would settle the Thessaly plain. They brought pottery, permanent villages, and a way of life that made cave dwelling obsolete. The Mesolithic world Avcii knew disappeared. The hunter-gatherer populations shrank, mixed with the incoming farmers, and eventually lost their genetic identity as a distinct group. But traces remain. Every modern Greek carries a small percentage of ancestry from people like Avcii, diluted through 10,000 years of admixture, but never fully erased. The Avcii reconstruction remains on display at the Acropolis Museum. Visitors expecting to see a face that looks Greek instead see a face that looks ancient. 9,000 years separate her from the people who now stand behind the glass and look at her face. In that time, the population of Greece was transformed 3 times over by migrations that rewrote the genetic code of every subsequent generation. The marble temples, the classical sculptures, the civilization we call Greek, all came thousands of years after Avcii died in a cave in Thessaly. She never saw a city, never touched metal, never planted a seed, but her DNA is still there, buried deep in the genomes of people who walk past the Parthenon every day without knowing they carry her inside them. If you enjoy evidence-based history, subscribe, because the next episode goes deeper into the ancient faces that challenge everything we thought we knew about our ancestors.